next speaker may know more intelligence secrets than anyone alive. As a Justice Department prosecutor, John Loftus once held some of the highest security clearances in the world with special access to NATO cosmic CIA code word and top secret nuclear files. As a private attorney, he works without charge to help hundreds of intelligence agents obtain lawful permission to declassify and publish the hidden secrets of our times. He is the author of 4 books of history, 3 of which have been made into film, 2 were international bestsellers, and 1 was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. Because of his vast experience, the Fox News channel has utilized Mr. Loftus as their intelligence analyst. His program, The Loftus Report, has been heard by 4 million listeners every weeknight on ABC National Radio. Mr. Loftus is president of the Intelligence Summit, an international non-profit, non-partisan educational forum for the intelligence agencies of the free world, and vice chairman of the Florida Holocaust Museum. As a young U.S. Army officer, John Loftus helped train Israelis on a covert operation that turned the tide of the battle in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. During the Carter and Reagan administrations, he investigated CIA cases and Nazi war criminals for the Attorney General of the United States. In 1982, his 60 Minutes expose of Nazis on the U.S. government payroll won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. John Loftus.
It always seems strange to have an Irish Catholic be the custodian of one of the secret files of the Holocaust. Today I want to tell you about 3 Holocaust diaries that I read in 3 different top secret vaults. The first one was written by an SS officer, and he recruited all of the collaborators in Eastern Europe. His recruits were the armies of the Holocaust. This man made a deal with British intelligence. He never stirred trial at Nuremberg. He traded his war memoirs for his freedom. One of the men named in this book was Mykola Lebed. Many of you don't know the name, but he scarred many of your families. Mykola Lebed became the head of the Ukrainian version of the Gestapo. He was brought to the United States, protected by my own Justice Department that brought him and hundreds, perhaps thousands of his fellow Ukrainian recruits to America during the Cold War. It was Mykola Lebed and his troops who murdered Simon Wiesenthal's mother and the members of the Goldrich family. After killing hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, and Ukrainians, he became a citizen of the United States. I was not allowed to expose him or touch him under penalty of imprisonment and disbarment. The third diary is the diary of a Holocaust survivor. His name was Saul, and my book was dedicated to him. You've all seen Saul's picture, at least if you've seen the movie Defiance. At the end of this movie about the Bielski partisans is a rare black and white photograph of what the real Bielski partisan people look like. Saul is in the front row, second from the right. He fought against the Nazis and the communists and came to America to find freedom, only living in the shadow of his killers. You see, the Justice Department and our State Department had resettled the Belarusian Nazis and the Ukrainian Nazis in central New Jersey, and Saul was living in between them and didn't know. Now, there are people who are not Jewish who do not understand the Holocaust, why we should care about it. Our failure to prosecute the World War II Nazis causes damage to us today. There was one group of files I read that I couldn't understand because I don't speak Arabic. But I read those files in translation over the years to come. The Arab Nazis were the intelligence arm of the Third Reich. They had an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood. It was sent to crush the infant state of Israel in 1948, It was recruited for covert operations to use the Arab Nazis to offset the Arab communists during the Cold War. Vice President Bush took the Arab Nazis out of the closet for the last time in the 1980s. We used them here in America to recruit the Mujahideen of Afghanistan. We actually had World War II era Arab Nazis recruiting a younger generation. The Muslim Brotherhood splintered. It became Hamas, which still uses the Nazi salute, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and of course Al-Qaeda. 90% of the US government is trying to hunt down terrorism. 90% of the US government tried to find and prosecute Nazis. 10% of the US government has been blocking them. To this day, America is the only modern Western nation that does not designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group. America is the only nation that does not open up its classified files, along with the British Secret Service. The British have a 75-year time ban. So this year they're going to open up the files for the year 1937. Over the next 10 to 20 years, you will discover that 1/3 of the Holocaust has been classified. It's been buried in British intelligence vaults and in American intelligence vaults because we had to follow the British rules. I was warned I would go to jail if I ever spoke about this or wrote about it. Last year, I got a letter from the Central Intelligence Agency saying I don't have to submit my books for censorship anymore. The 30-year classification clock for me has run out. And now it is time to tell the truth. There were people in Wall Street who were funding the Bolshevik Revolution and the Nazi Revolution at the same time that they were funding the Islamic extremists to create what we now know as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They had no ideology. It was just about profit. They pulled their investment capital out of the United States and partly caused the great crash of 1929 and secretly bought control of German companies. Now, after 5 years, a group of us have been working without pay. We've finished a documentary film that will be out in your movie theaters later this year. It's called American Secrets. If you do not understand the financial corruption of the American families who funded Hitler, then you cannot understand what happened next in the Holocaust. American Secrets is the film that will expose that. My book, America's Nazi Secret, talks about only a few of the many things I saw in those vaults. Let's start with the first diary. SS Obersturmbannführer Friedrich Burkhardt was a senior Nazi officer. He worked with the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units. His section was called Vorkommando Moscow, Forward Command Moscow. His job was to recruit people from all of the countries in Eastern Europe who would guide the German army in their invasion of Russia. The German army, of course, never reached Moscow, but the men that Friedrich Burkhardt recruited became the armies of the Holocaust. You see, even the guards at Treblinka and Sobibor weren't German, they were Ukrainians, or Belarusians. These were the sad few who volunteered to climb to power and wealth over the bodies of their own countrymen. The Burkhardt's book was the invaluable key. The British Secret Service planned to use all of the men that Burkhardt had recruited for Hitler to work for Britain. You know, Burkhardt was saying, if only Hitler had listened to me, and we used these collaborators of Eastern Europe, we could have overthrown the Russians easily. The British Secret Service peddled that line of nonsense to a handful of Americans. So the tragedy in this is the genius behind the British recruitment of Eastern European Nazis was a man by the name of Kim Philby. See, some of you get the joke already. Kim Philby was the highest-ranking communist spy ever to infiltrate the British Secret Service. Kim Philby agreed with Buchar to use these Nazis because all during World War II, Soviet intelligence had infiltrated the Nazi ranks top to bottom in Eastern Europe. Philby peddled these Nazi networks to the very gullible Americans. Understand, President Truman knew nothing of this. The CIA knew nothing of this. The British Secret Service tried to sell the Ukrainian Nazi group as their centerpiece to the Americans. The CIA turned it down. And so what the British did was they worked with our State Department and our Justice Department. They committed mutiny behind President Truman's back. They brought Mykola Lebed into America on an intelligence visa signed by the Attorney General of the United States. That's the top secret file I saw. My Justice Department brought in the leading Nazi, and they knew he was a Nazi. The State Department spy service was recruiting Nazis while the CIA was hunting them. The State Department wrote to the Justice Department and said, we want to bring in the rest of Mykola Lebed's people. We want to recruit his whole unit. They call it the SB. That was the Ukrainian version of the Gestapo. Because the State Department spy agency wanted to use the Ukrainian Nazis as assassins behind the Iron Curtain. They said they've already killed 35,000 communist officials so far. And so the State Department and Justice Department committed mutiny and brought the Ukrainian Nazis to America, and the Belarusian Nazis to America, and on and on and on. Buchar himself did not come to America that we know of, but a copy of his memoirs of Russia under German occupation. He was interviewed by an American sergeant who took a copy of his memoirs and made the recommendation that Buchar not be tried at Nuremberg, that he be protected. That American sergeant was a guy named Alexander Dahlen. He took Buchar's manuscript, published it under his own name, and became chairman of the Department of History at Stanford University. His book is called Russia Under German Rule. I have had another PhD historian examine it. It is a complete plagiarism of SS Obersturmbannführer's manuscript. Dahlen padded it out with a few footnotes to make it look as if he had done the research. Professor Dahlen and a handful of other members of the academic community knew that the Nazis were coming to America and kept silent. Senior members of the Justice Department knew and kept silent. And then I found Saul's diary. And here's this heroic Jew. When Saul fought against the Nazis and the communists and came to America to find freedom. And when he got here, he didn't put the past behind him. He sat down and wrote out his memoirs of what had happened to the 50,000 Jews from his little corner of the world who would never be able to speak for themselves. He wrote about what happened under the Bielski Brigade. And he named many of the people that were named in Buchar's memoirs. Our State Department classified Saul's diary, and they hid it in the vaults where I found it decades later. And so I decided I could not keep silent, and I fought and got permission to tell at least part of the story to Congress and 60 Minutes. And I dedicated my book, as much as escaped censorship back then, to Solomon, a Jew who bore witness to the Holocaust, and to Meg, my newborn, so that she may never have it. You know, we said never again, but isn't the reality that it's been again and again? We've had nearly 4 dozen attempts at genocide since the Holocaust. It has not stopped. The mistake we made in not finishing the job at Nuremberg, in letting the Muslim Brotherhood go free there's a good chance the Muslim Brotherhood may take over the government of Egypt this year. The terrorist groups that the Muslim Brotherhood created are killing our sons and daughters in military uniform this year. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Nazis had the identical philosophy. They hated Jews and Christians and democracy and Western culture. They wanted us dead. And the arrogant incompetence in our government fell for Kim Philby's line. And we took in what we thought were freedom fighters, only to find out that it was the dregs of the Nazi war criminals, and the Justice Department covered it up. I blew the whistle. I stood before Congress. I gave them Makola Lebed's name. And I just found out this year that the Justice Department submitted a fraudulent biography for Makola Lebed to Congress. They told Congress during the 1985 hearings that Makola Lebed was the leader of the anti-Nazi resistance in the Ukraine. They produced a phony Gestapo wanted poster for him. The Justice Department pulled the same stunt on the CIA. The CIA thought that Makola Lebed was an anti-Nazi resistance leader. They employed him for 40 years. Many of us now think that Makola Lebed was the longest lasting Soviet spy inside the CIA. So do not tell me this was ancient history. Makola Lebed just died. Right? We have to be true to all those men and women who know evils that came out of communism. You know, I think Elie Wiesel was right. There were three great evils in our lifetime: communism, fascism, and indifference. And indifference is the deadliest of the three. Left alive from the Justice Department who should be made to face the grand jury. But I'm not naive. Who's going to prosecute the prosecutors? The Justice Department? We'd be better off simply to have Congress set up a truth commission. Get all these people in the community come forward and say it's too late for justice, just tell the truth. Or have President Obama pardon them on the condition that they tell the truth. Tell the truth about their current protection of the Muslim Brotherhood. Have them tell the truth about the Nazis. Tell them the truth about how we get in bed with the Saudi extremists. We have to keep faith with the past. This is a wonderful country. America is one of the few places on the planet where I would be free to speak to you about this subject. In the next 10 to 20 years, the files of the Holocaust will begin to emerge from the British Public Records Office in London and from the National Archives in Washington. And the world will learn the true extent of the Holocaust and its horrible aftermath. Please remember that there are always people like me that try to stop. You know, my family became very close with Saul, the Holocaust survivor. And he too was proud of America. He said, John, in this country, you should never be afraid to speak the truth. Thank you for listening.